I want to be clear with you all that a new day has come. To San Francisco, to Oakland, to Baltimore, to Ferguson, to Atlanta, there is a movement sweeping this country, and we are not going to stop until you stop killing us.
Shut it down! Shut it down! The time for the middle ground is over.
Since October 7th, 2023, Israel has murdered upwards of 80,000 Palestinians, most of them women and children, inside of places they were seeking as refuge, such as bombed-out buildings and tents. This number is an undercount, including indirect deaths and injuries. The total number of murders more likely exceeds 200,000. Since the supposed ceasefire agreement last October, Israel has violated it hundreds and hundreds of times, resulting in the murders of 831 plus people. The United States' so-called Board of Peace has brought nothing it promised, certainly not peace, and as eyes are turned to Lebanon and Iran, Israel's uptick of violence in both the Gaza Strip and West Bank marches on. Joining us to discuss all of this and more is Rami Khouri, a distinguished public policy fellow at the American University of Beirut. He is an analyst and co-author of the book Understanding Hamas and Why That Matters. Good morning, Rami.
Good morning, Kat.
Thanks.
Glad to be with you.
Glad to have you back on the show. I want to start with the news that the proposal that several Palestinian factions offered to Israel and the United States, of those factions Hamas was a part, and the assertion that they've made that they cannot and will not disarm unless there are actual guarantees of a real ceasefire and the establishment of true Palestinian statehood. Does that about capture it? What else am I missing from the proposal that the Palestinians put forth?
Well, the Palestinians have in various guises and leaderships, the PLO, Fatah, Hamas, the Resistance Front, and however you look at them, unpopular opinion, for years have been telling the Israelis that we're prepared to coexist with Israel as a Jewish majority state as it is now, within its 67 borders, adjusted as negotiators agree on both sides, that we're essentially willing to live with them peacefully forever, with guarantees. All the Arab world supports that position, and 57 Muslim-majority countries also support that position. There's never been as emphatic, extensive, and continuous peace offering, I think, to any country in the world as there has been to Israel from the Palestinians, the Arabs, and the Islamic world as this situation. And the amazing thing is that Israel and the United States, which enables its genocidal expansion, has never responded. So, the Palestinians could say they'll take off their underwear and stand on their head and join a circus, and the Israelis will ignore them. The Israelis have not expressed for the Palestinians any serious willingness to live peacefully with them. They've signed treaties with Egypt and signed a treaty with Jordan, and they gave up all the land that they occupied, and they accepted basically all the Jordanian and Egyptian positions about their sovereignty. And those two peace agreements were really very impressive. But why the Israelis don't do anything like that with the Palestinians or the Lebanese or the Syrians is one of the great tragedies of our age. It's not a mystery, but it's a tragedy, because the Israelis feel that they want to dominate the region politically. They don't have to physically occupy the whole region, but they do want to occupy all of Palestine, and they're working to do that. But they want to be the hegemon. They want to be the person who calls the shots. They want to be the boss about who's allowed to have arms, who's allowed to have high-speed internet, et cetera, trade agreements, energy sources, whatever. So this peace, this position by the Palestinians today is nothing new, but it is important that they reaffirm it, that we are willing to coexist with Israel, but Israel has to coexist with us. That peace is a two-way process. And the Egyptian and Jordanian peace agreements with Israel really affirmed that in a very dramatic and hopeful way. Whether the Israeli population or leadership will ever be able to pull back from their genocidal zealotry now that they're doing, and their rampaging, killing all over the region, and ignoring ceasefires, ignoring international law, ignoring the UN, whether that day is going to come or not is up to the Israeli people. I know Jewish people around the world are not particularly happy with what the state of Israel is doing. Israel claims it's the state of the Jewish people. It speaks for the Jewish people. Most Jewish people around the world, I don't think necessarily accept that. There is an identification, of course, that many Jews have, most Jews have with Israel. They want a safe, peaceful Israel where Jews can live in peace, but they don't want a zombie runaway killing machine committing genocide and attacking Christian and Muslim shrines and bombing water systems and making life impossible all on the borders all around Israel in Lebanon and Syria and Gaza. So the Israelis have a huge, the Israelis, the Zionists, and the Jewish people. And those are three distinct groups of people, but they all link in many ways. They all have to decide what it is that they want for the future of Israel, for the future of the Jewish people or the status of the Jewish people in Palestine and Israel, and the relationship between Judaism and Zionism and the state of Israel and international law. Those have never been clarified. Israel never created a constitution as it had promised to do when it got independence in 47, 48 from the UN. So really the ball is in the court of the Israelis. They are militarily dominant, but if there's one lesson from the last 75 years, certainly my whole life, I was born in 48, the year of the Nakba and the Palestinian catastrophe and the birth of Israel. If there's one lesson, and we see it in Iran today, is that military might will never achieve your political objectives. Military might alone can be incredibly destructive, as Israel is showing. It can be cruel, can be barbaric, vicious, mean, often senseless, provocative. There's many adjectives we can use for people who use massive military power to demean other people, because that's an attempt to make those people disappear. But the lesson of our history, the Palestinian history, is that, and the Iranians are saying the same thing on a bigger scale, is that we will not disappear because you have bigger bombs than we do. You know, what Israel has done in Gaza is the functional equivalent of the American nuclear bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The Israelis didn't drop a nuclear bomb, but when you look at the landscape in Gaza and you look at the photographs of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, you look at the number of people who've died or will die from the repercussions of these attacks, they're pretty much the equivalent. So what Israel has done with American direct support and often enthusiasm by Republican and Democratic administrations is shown that the nuclear threat by itself is not such a staggering thing anymore, because you can achieve the exact same results as a nuclear bomb by conventional weapons applied in a barbaric and savage and continuous way, which is what Zionism and the State of Israel have done in Gaza, and they're now doing it in Lebanon and Syria, and they're trying to do it in Iran. That's why you have so many Jews around the world who are against this, who speak up against this. And there's two great battles going on. The battle between the State of Israel and the forces of resistance all around it, Arab and Iranian and Turkish and others. And there's a battle in the Western world, mostly, Europe and North America, by people who condemn genocide and who refuse to be complicit in it. Christians, Jews, Muslims, all different nationalities, colors, faiths, whatever. People who condemn what Israel is doing with American aid, and the attempt of the American government to stop that kind of criticism, to silence the criticism of genocide. It's really a fascinating dual battlefield taking place now. And I would say that Israel and the United States are losing on both battlefields, but it's a very slow incremental process.
Rami, I want to go back to something you said early on in your response, and that's the utilization of this term coexistence. I do realize that has been a conversation for a real long time. I do also, however, question the possibility of that now. Things have gone so far, have become so horrific, so barbaric. I don't know. I'll speak for myself. I have a hard enough time living in America with the same system that's been doing what it's done to me, my ancestors, right, for 400 plus years.
Right.
I cannot imagine being Palestinian and making an agreement to live in peace with the folks that murdered my entire family, 200, 300 people.
You can imagine because you're American, Afro-American, Black. You've lived an experience in your life and your parents and before. You know what it's like to walk down the street in a major city or a rural area and have some white people tell you go walk on the other side of the street, or you can't come into this shop, or try to chase you and just give you a hard time. The kind of racism that the United States applied since its birth in the United States, and the kind of anti-Semitism that the U.S. has long practiced, is very much paralleled by what Israel is doing in the Palestinian areas, as treating the Palestinians as second-class humans who don't have the same rights as the state of Israel, and therefore they treat them as inferior people. And it's really, the parallels are fascinating and troubling, but they're very real and they're continuing. And this is why you have so steadily growing popular support around the whole world among all kinds of people, religious groups, ethnic groups, national groups, whatever, support for Palestinian rights and equal rights for Israelis and Palestinians. You know, the Palestinians are not trying to destroy the state of Israel or kill Jews. This is what Netanyahu says, and this is Zionist propaganda. And this is similar to what, the propaganda of white racists in the United States, who say that Black people and immigrants are dangerous and we got to lock them up. And so the reality is that we have a long battle that continues today in different forms in different places. Essentially, what Israel is doing is reaffirming and reapplying in a more virulent form the traditional tools and attitudes of colonialism that the white Western Christian, or in this case, the Zionist person, has more rights to this land than the indigenous people. And the indigenous people, for the last couple of hundred years, had very little opportunity to fight back anywhere in the world until the decolonization period happened in the mid-late 20th century. And South Africa was kind of the culmination of this. But the Zionist assault on Palestinian rights, and remember that Palestine in 1917, when the British promised the Zionists a homeland in Palestine, Palestine was 93% Arab, including my family in Nazareth, who are, some of them are still there. It was a heavily Arab land where Christians, Muslims, and Jews lived quite peacefully and well together. But then this process of colonialism upended all this and said, no, this is going to be a land for the Jewish people, for Zionists. Most Jews around the world didn't particularly go there, but people in Europe flooded there because of what the Nazis were doing. But the important thing about Zionism is it started, 40, 50 years before the Nazis came to power. So it's not only a reflection of the Hitler and the Nazis and the Holocaust. It's a reflection of a supremacist, religious, ethno-nationalist, racist, militant, expanding ideology that started with a bunch of individuals in Russia and East Europe in the 1880s, 1890s, and then was supported by racist white people in England who said, oh yeah, a Jewish state, Palestine, that's great. We sent all the Jews there. We don't want them here. So this is a much bigger, older struggle than just a few people who are fighting over a piece of land. The Israelis want to portray this as an endemic, criminal-minded Arab minority, the Palestinians, who just want to kill Jews and drive them into the sea, which is how Zionist propaganda has always worked. It's the same way they're using that same propaganda to demonize the Iranians. And the American government, in its buffoonery and ignorance, accepts a lot of this. And the American mainstream media, in its complicity and greed, also sends this message along. But that period is slowly coming, that era where Zionism would issue some crazy, wild statement about various Arabs. And, the Zionists trash talk the Palestinians, the PLO, Arafat, and then Saddam Hussein, Gamal Abdel Nasser in Egypt, Gaddafi in Libya, Assad in Syria, and now it's the Iranians. There's always a bad guy, a vicious Hitler-like Nazi rebirth in some Middle Eastern land that threatens Israel. Therefore, Israel has to wipe them out. And this is what's happening now. But the Western world and all the world has woken up to the realities because they saw the live genocide in Gaza. The genocide in Gaza, the American-Israeli joint venture genocide, will turn out to be one of the defining historical fulcrums of the last millennium, I predict, because it's really the last colonial battle, and it sparked bigger problems, bigger wars, which we see now in Iran. It happened that there was a series of leaders in the US with Trump and his golfing buddies who knew nothing about the world, didn't understand the reality of Israel and Zionism and Netanyahu, and fell for his propaganda and attacked Iran, which was a ridiculously dangerous thing to do, but he did it. And we therefore now have a much bigger global problem, which still can be resolved if we go back to the roots, which is that white people, whether they're in North America or Europe, Israel, anywhere, have the same rights as white and brown and middle color, dark people in the middle in Lebanon and Turkey and Iran and Palestine and Egypt. They all have the same rights, equal rights, under law and under God, if you believe in God. And most people do, in some God. They actually mostly believe in the same God, but that's a separate story.
That's a different interview, Rami. We'll be here way longer than the time I have you allotted for. I'm an organizer, right? In addition to getting to run my mouth on this platform, most of my days are spent organizing. And for me, that's about how do we win, right? Not about how we continue on in the same slog we've been in. And so I look at things like what is Israel's way out? That they've gone so far now. What is the ability to backtrack? And I guess as you were talking, I was thinking about the population of Israel, the general population, men, women, children, families, etc. Some of whom we've seen acting in horrific ways, right? That was the other thing that made pieces of the genocide so horrific, is to watch then parents and their children celebrating the bombing, the genocidal assault of other families and their children. There have been some cracks. Bear with me as I get to where I think I'm trying to go. There have been some cracks in the veneer raid. There was anger over how Netanyahu handled getting the hostages back, which they really didn't get back because Israel bombed most of them. Um, Anger over how this continues to go on. I guess what I'm asking is there any possibility that with elections coming up, that there's been enough shift or could be organized to be enough shift in the ideology of the populace that it forces the government's hand to at least start to rein back the terror they're raining on Gaza? Or am I being silly?
No, you're being very wise. And as an organizer, you understand how change happens. I mean, I remember being at college in upstate New York in the mid 60s when the civil rights movement had a big push forward. Back then, they used to call it the race riots. But of course, it was the civil rights movement in a new form, and the woman liberation movement, gender equality, environment care, and Vietnam. There was four massive civic, political movements all over the U.S. It was a very turbulent time, and people were organizing, and there were activist movements and political movements, and some Catholic priest threw some pig blood on the draft files in Maryland, so there was a incredible intensity of action at the community level, and this is what started to bring changes in all of these regions, in all of these arenas. Not complete equality and perfect union, but that's how change happens. And what you're saying is exactly correct, that we have to assume that people can change, even the worst killers. The answer to your question is that the Israeli people, I believe, and I've interacted with them all my life since college days. I started having debates with the B'nai B'rith, little kids, and at the '67 war. And from then, I've maintained constantly a dialogue. Jewish friends, Israeli friends, pro-Israeli American, Christian, Zionist nutcases. But I've maintained these links with them to because I need to know what they think. If you want to make peace with your enemy, you've got to understand your enemy and then change them from your enemy to your neighbor. So yes, the Israelis can change. The majority of Jews around the world are not happy with what the Israeli government is doing. Many Israelis are not happy. Certainly, the majority of American Jews are not happy with Netanyahu's tactics, though the majority want a safe Jewish state, which has been offered to them, but they haven't responded. So the change, yes, can come. It's not going to come quickly. It's not going to come with the next election. We have no idea who's going to run in the next election. The indications now are that the majority of mainstream politicians are going to stay close to the right-wing messianic racist zealots who now have power in Israel. And that's for many reasons, which we don't have time to discuss now. But the change isn't going to come quickly, but it will come over time. But it will require two things. It will require a really credible, effective Palestinian government that represents all Palestinian thought, Palestinian thinking, and it will require significant international coordinated intervention to push forward on a negotiating process that brings both sides to the table and aims to achieve equal rights for Israelis and Palestinians. You see stuff going on now in Iran. You see stuff in Lebanon, which the Americans try to dominate in diplomatic processes. These are jokes. This is like Popeye or Roadrunner and Wile E. Coyote on TV. This it's not serious diplomacy, but this is what the United States has done historically because that's the colonial way. And this is coming to an end. It's come to an end almost everywhere in the world. And now you see in Iran and in Lebanon and in Palestine to an extent a historic affirmation of the fundamental reality of what it means to be a human being, that you will not accept to be dehumanized simply by your neighbor who has different color skin or different religion and a bigger gun than you do. You will follow that great American tradition of give me liberty or give me death. You will resist, and people resist legally, forcefully, and sometimes they use illegal forms, but this is what happens in warfare. But the vast majority are expressing a willingness to coexist, and the Iranians and the Lebanese and Hezbollah and others, and the Palestinians, Hamas and Islamic Jihad and others, whatever criticisms one can make of them, which is perfectly reasonable, they have done something historic that they have, especially Hezbollah and Iran, but also Hamas. They forced the Israelis and the Americans twice in the last 2 years into serious ceasefires and for them to stop their assault. They haven't stopped them completely, but they forced them to tone down, stop for a short period, start a negotiation. So this is an important sign. This has never really happened before. And the Americans and the Israelis didn't stop because they realized that they better comply with international law. They stopped because they were losing votes in Kansas and California and Virginia for the November elections. They lost because people all around the world were looking at the United States as a killer, a robotic killer nation that supports a zombie killing nation in Israel. And they stopped because they realized that they were not achieving their goals militarily. It's quite extraordinary to see what's going on in South Lebanon today and Iran. We don't have time to talk about it, but the technology Hezbollah has developed is fascinating, but this is for another time. So I think we're on the cusp possibly of a historic change, which will achieve what you asked about, a change in the leadership in Israel, but it won't happen by itself. It needs massive international intervention. China, Turkey, Russia, Indonesia, some of the Europeans when they wake up out of their deep sleep, and people in North America, and particularly Jewish groups. All of these people have to come together and force or push the Israelis into a more reasonable negotiating posture, which we can start a negotiation which can lead to a better life.
You're listening to Law and Disorder. I'm your host, Kat Brooks, and we are in conversation with Rami Khouri, a distinguished public policy fellow at the American University of Beirut. He's an analyst and co-author of the book Understanding Hamas and Why That Matters. All right, let's move on to Lebanon. I've got about 13 minutes left with you. Where over the weekend, this morning, Israel has told even more Lebanese people they must evacuate the southern region, pushing further into the south with more violence. Hezbollah has been responding. I asked this of my guest, I believe it was last week, about the nonsensical talks that were happening between the Lebanese government, the United States, and Israel, and the point and purpose of the Lebanese government's engagement in those talks, knowing full well there's nothing that they can say to Hezbollah other than I made Israel and the United States put down their arms. That's going to make Hezbollah sit down.
Well, the Lebanese government is reacting to a very, very difficult situation it finds itself in. It has a very weak national army by intent. The U.S. and Israel and others in the West always wanted the Lebanese army to be weak so it wouldn't threaten Israel. And it has a divided population because half of it loves Hezbollah, half of it doesn't. It has an economic total collapse, and I lived in Lebanon almost half my life, and I just moved about 4 years ago. The place is a total wreck, but the Lebanese have an extra human gene for perseverance. They're quite extraordinary. And they just slog on and keep doing the best they can. And they have to, because this is the seventh time. This is number 7 Israeli major incursion or attack on Lebanon or occupation of the south of Lebanon. It's quite amazing. And the Israelis keep doing the same thing with the same result, and they pull out, and because the Lebanese resist them. So the government now in Lebanon has kind of become a little bit desperate, and they've said, look, let's try to negotiate under American auspices, and maybe that they'll force the Israelis to stop the attacks, and then we can work out some kind of permanent ceasefire, not necessarily a peace agreement, but a permanent armistice like there was in 48, a non-aggression agreement, and leave the big issues to be resolved in the future. When the Palestine issue is resolved, then you can have a permanent resolution with Lebanon. The issue in Lebanon is that it's Hezbollah and its supporters who are the armed, powerful group who drove the Israelis out of Lebanon 2 or 3 times and are trying to do the same thing now. And so there's no easy answer to this issue because the Lebanese government doesn't have the support of all the Lebanese people. Hezbollah has the support of half the Lebanese people. If Hezbollah drives the Israelis out and forces them to observe a ceasefire, as it did after 2005, 2006, then Hezbollah's support expands and Hezbollah becomes less of a military movement and more of a political group in the country, which they are. They're in parliament, they're in the cabinet. And then you have the external element, which is the Iranian support for Hezbollah, which angers a lot of Lebanese. And then there's the human dimension, which is that repeated Israeli attacks, and these attacks now, this situation now, the Israelis are attacking in the south, destroying entire swaths of land and villages in the south like they did in Gaza. They're applying the Gaza model to Lebanon and parts of Beirut. So they've gone a step further in their vulgarity and their barbarism, and it won't work. It just creates more will to resist. The Israelis and the Americans have a blind spot in their calculations and their strategy. They don't understand the mentality of people in the Middle East, of whatever identity, Christian, Muslim, Jewish, Armenian, Circassian, whatever they may be, tribal people. They don't understand that the people in this region have lived here for thousands of years, and they can trace their ancestry back in their village or in their town for thousands of years in some cases, and they will fight to the death to stay there. And if they're driven out, they will fight to the death to come back. And you can't eliminate this kind of sentiment. And the more that the Israelis act aggressively with American support in Palestine or in Lebanon or in Syria or in Iran, the more resistance they generate. That resistance may not manifest itself right away because the Israelis and the Americans are hovering above with drones and they can bomb any individual or house or village they want any time, and they do. But that resistance will manifest itself over time. And this is exactly what you're seeing in Iran and what you're seeing in Lebanon. And the Lebanese situation can only be resolved through a serious mediation, which is not what the U.S. does. The U.S. supports the Israeli position, but a serious mediation and negotiation between Lebanon and Israel is possible to have a permanent ceasefire, a real ceasefire, not a Popeye ceasefire as Hegseth he wants, tough guy, a lot of tattoos, big muscles, beat the hell out of them, or Trump's approach, we're going to destroy them. And Trump has destroyed Iran 5 times already, and now he keeps saying, we're going to destroy them, we're going to wipe them off the map, we're going to eliminate their civilization. I mean, this is unserious diplomacy and low quality political engagement by ignorant people who are often heavily manipulated or influenced by Zionist extremists in Israel and in the US. And we see this over and over. And this is why the US is taking this position in Lebanon, which is to support the Israeli position. They say we want to have a mediation, but the Israelis can keep attacking as much as they want. I mean, this is unheard of in the history of diplomacy, but it's not unheard of in the history of colonialism or Islamism. So my long answer to your short question is that these negotiations are not going anywhere, but they will clarify what needs to be done to get a successful interaction between Lebanon and Israel and Hezbollah to stop the fighting, let people live a normal life, and then at a stage when it's possible, move into a permanent, serious negotiation that's fair to all sides.
Let's talk about Iran briefly before I let you go. I'll start with Iran says that it hit a U.S. ship in the Strait. The U.S. denies it. What is the significance if it has?
Well, what's going on in this Strait of Hormuz is really fascinating because, again, it shows the new reality that we're experiencing. I would say, argue all around the Middle East, because, like I said, Palestine, Lebanon, Yemen, Iraq, Iran, you're seeing this assertion by a group or a country or a bunch of people who are weaker than the West militarily or Israel, but also finding new ways to check the aggression of Israel and the US and others. And the Iranians have discovered I mean, they always knew the potential power of controlling ship movements through the Strait of Hormuz. And they're doing that now. The Americans keep going back to the military. This is the Joe Palooka model of diplomacy, that this is cartoon diplomacy. It's not serious, but this is what they do. They get out the big guns, they flex their muscles, and they say, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. The latest gimmick is they're going to escort ships out. If it's a humanitarian operation, and you have some ships that are delivering baby powder or something, and they're stuck, the Iranians would probably have no problem saying, let them go to India. But they're not going to accept anything that allows the U.S. to determine who goes in and out of the Gulf, because this is no longer acceptable. The Iranians have paid a heavy price. The massive destruction is going to take them a decade or more to rebuild. But the U.S. and Israel have not achieved any of their main goals. And of course, their goals keep evolving over time because they're not clear and they're not realistic. But this is how U.S. buffoon diplomacy works. They issue these statements, they sound tough, but they can't achieve them because they're unrealistic. Not they're unrealistic because they're politically not astute, because they go against human nature. Human
Yeah,
beings, whether they're Iranians or African Americans or Native Americans or North Africans in France or any group of people who have been colonized and abused, will resist. And this is
that's
what
right.
we're seeing.
That's right. That's right. I want to play a clip right quick, Rami, and have you respond to it. Really, it's going to be expanding on some of what you just said. That's clips Trump's announcement of Project Freedom. His name's Kill Me. But let's go ahead. Let's roll that clip about Project Freedom, please.
In my note.
Well, maybe we don't have a clip about Project Freedom. Hold, please. Um, All right. Well, we don't have a clip about Project Freedom, Corey, but I'm gonna have you respond to Project Freedom, which is apparently the United States is going to help other ships make it through. Iran said that they would take that as a breach of the ceasefire violation. I think again now we're seeing it, now has said, well, now they're just going to advise ships about maybe where not to go because there may potentially be mines. And then what I'm going to tack onto that is there's another headline that says that Trump is going to talk to China about perhaps getting involved in all of this and utilizing his sworn enemy, China, to help deal with his other sworn enemies, which at this point seems to be every single country in the so-called Middle East.
Well, the Operation Freedom that the United States is launching, they call it Operation Freedom in the world of Trump and Hegseth and their fantasy world. The rest of the world calls it Operation Recolonization because they're asserting that the Western uh, armies have and people have greater rights and power in this region. And it won't work. The Iranians, I think, have shown themselves to be very astute. They're very aware of history. They're very aware of foreign subjugation against Iran itself over the last 120 years, starting with the Russians and the British and others. But the Iranians will respond, I think, in a way that challenges the United States. Says, "Oh, okay, you want to let some of these boats out? Then all of our oil exports have to go out. They won't allow the U.S., even with military power that the U.S. is going to apply, they will not allow the U.S. to unilaterally enforce a procedure that is colonial in nature, based on military superiority, and results in the continued death and strangulation and deprivation and pauperization and dehumanization of the people of Iran or other people in the region. They've gone beyond the point where they would put up with this. They learned from the last year of negotiating with the U.S. That the negotiators themselves, Kushner and I can't remember his golfing buddy's name. The two main negotiators have no idea how to negotiate seriously. Diplomacy,
Question.
uh, pardon?
No, go ahead. Sorry, go
Uh,
ahead.
uh,
I don't want to interrupt you.
so the U.S. negotiators have proved to be unqualified, and the U.S. government has proved to be duplicitous and insincere. That during the negotiations, twice Israel and the U.S. attacked Iran, and they did it once with Hamas when the negotiations were happening for Hamas Israel. The Israelis assassinated the Hamas leader in Qatar. So the U.S. Israel have zero credibility in the negotiation world. That's why you need external involvement to guarantee that any agreement is actually adhered to. But the Iranians also learned that you can't just say no, 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 that if the other side makes a move, you need to use that, I guess, like they do in judo, to turn the energy of your opponent against them.
It's done.
And they'll
Yeah.
probably do that with counter proposals. But we'll see. This is going to go on. But I think it's pretty clear now, both to the Israelis and the Americans, that they can destroy all of Iran. I mean, they could literally destroy the basis of life in Iran like they did in Gaza. It's a much bigger country. But if they went on a bombing spree for 6 months, they could destroy every school, every water system, every hospital, every farm, every factory and make Iran, or at least Tehran and Mashhad and Isfahan or whatever, the big cities, look like Gaza. They could do that physically, but it's not going to achieve their goals. So I think they realize that more military action is not going to work well either in Lebanon or in um, Iran, and probably not in Palestine and Gaza as well. So my guess is we're in a phase now of serious uh, negotiations under the guise of unilateral um, assertions. The US said, we're going to do this. The Iranians say, oh, we're going to do this. But behind the scenes, they're still negotiating through the Pakistanis, which is very important. And I think the whole world is going to lean on the US and Israel to say, come on, guys, grow up. This is
Yeah,
the whole world is suffering now. And
exactly.
yeah,
Exactly. Rami Khouri, thank you so much for joining me this morning. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. I always learn so much.
thank you, Kat. Good to be with you. Keep up the good work.
You too. We've been speaking to Rami G. Khouri, a distinguished public policy fellow at the American University of Beirut. He's an analyst and co-author of the book Understanding Hamas and Why That Matters.